It's late at night. You open a real estate app on your phone, not because you're ready to buy, but because curiosity refuses to let you sleep. House after house appears on the screen, nothing extravagant, nothing luxurious, just normal homes that look average. Then you see the price. $480,000, $520,000, $550,000. You pause. Your brain automatically starts doing the math, even though you didn't ask it to. You earn a solid income, let's say $95,000 a year, well above the national average. On paper, that should mean options, comfort, and stability. The app says you're pre-qualified. The green check mark appears, and for a moment, it feels like progress. But pre-qualified doesn't mean affordable. It just means the bank is willing to take the risk, not that you can live with the payment. You scroll back to the numbers. A $500,000 home with 10% down still means a loan of $450,000. At today's interest rates, the monthly payment alone sits near $2,800 before taxes, insurance, or maintenance. Add property taxes, insurance, basic upkeep, and suddenly housing alone costs over $4,000 a month. That's nearly half of your take-home pay before groceries, transportation, healthcare, or saving a single dollar. You're not imagining the tension. The numbers don't feel tight because you're bad with money. They feel tight because something in the system doesn't add up. And that's the moment the real question forms. If earning well and being approved still feels this fragile, then what does affordable actually mean? The approval feels reassuring at first. The app shows a number, the bank confirms eligibility, and suddenly the house looks possible instead of distant. But approval is not a financial green light. It's a lending decision designed to protect the institution, not your future. Banks don't ask whether your life will feel tight. They ask whether you can technically make the payment if everything goes right. They assume steady income, no interruptions, no health issues, no layoffs, no unexpected costs, a version of life where volatility simply doesn't exist. When a lender approves you for a $500,000 home, they're not saying it's safe. They're saying your debt-to-income ratio falls below a threshold that minimizes their risk. That threshold often allows housing costs to consume 40% or more of your gross income, a level that quietly erodes flexibility long before it triggers default. On paper, it works. In real life, it suffocates. Because the payment doesn't rise gradually, it arrives fully formed every single month, demanding priority over everything else. Savings become optional, emergencies become threats, and long-term planning get postponed indefinitely. The house doesn't just absorb money, it absorbs margin, decision-making freedom, and the ability to recover from shocks. This is the part nobody explains during the approval process. Affordability isn't about whether you can pay, it's about whether you can still breathe after you do. A mortgage can be approved while quietly locking you into a decade of financial tension. And once you sign, the calculation stops being theoretical. The system no longer cares how the payment feels, only that it arrives on time. That's why so many people feel confused after buying. They didn't make a reckless choice. They trusted a definition of affordability that was never designed for real life. Approval answers one question only: will the bank get paid? It says nothing about whether you will still be free. Now let's slow the story down and run the numbers the way real life actually experiences them, not as percentages, but as monthly pressure. Imagine a home priced at $480,000, not luxury, not excess, just what the market now calls normal in many cities. With a modest down payment of 10%, that's $48,000 upfront and a remaining loan of $432,000. At current interest rates, the monthly payment alone lands near $2,700 before the house even becomes livable. Add property taxes, which quietly average $400 to $600 a month depending on location, Add insurance, another $250, maintenance, realistically $350 to $450 if nothing breaks, and suddenly housing costs push past $3,700 every single month. That number doesn't negotiate. It arrives before groceries, before savings, before retirement, before life. If your household earns $110,000 a year, that payment now consumes close to half of your take-home pay. Not because you overspent, not because you were reckless, but because the structure normalized this level of exposure. At this point, everything else becomes compressed. Savings slow to a crawl, emergencies get delayed, long-term planning gets replaced by short-term survival math. One unexpected repair isn't an inconvenience anymore, it's a disruption. One income interruption isn't stressful, it's destabilizing. This is how people become house rich and life poor without realizing it. The math doesn't explode all at once. It tightens gradually, month after month, until margin disappears. From the outside, it still looks like success. From the inside, every decision starts revolving around one question: can we still make the payment? That's when a home stops being shelter and quietly becomes an anchor. At this point, the question is no longer, can someone buy this house? The real question becomes, who can survive owning it without sacrificing everything else? Because affordability isn't about approval, it's about margin. Households that truly handle this level of housing cost usually fall into a narrow category. Either they earn well above $150,000 a year, or they rely on two strong incomes that must both remain stable, uninterrupted, and permanent. That second scenario looks safe on paper, but it's fragile in reality. Two incomes don't double security, they often eliminate the backup plan. When both salaries are fully committed to fixed costs, there is no buffer left. If one income drops, even temporarily, the structure doesn't bend, it breaks. This is how households that should be fine end up stressed, cautious, and constantly calculating. Not because they made a bad choice, but because the system assumes nothing will ever go wrong. Now compare that to a household earning slightly less, but with housing costs capped at a third of their income. They save consistently, they absorb surprises, they make decisions without panic. Same effort, same responsibility, completely different outcome. The difference isn't discipline or intelligence, it's exposure. High fixed costs don't feel dangerous at first, they feel normal, even responsible. But over time, they quietly shrink your options. You stop negotiating harder at work, you avoid risks, you delay change. Not because you lack ambition, but because the margin is gone. And when margin disappears, freedom goes with it. This is the invisible line most people cross without noticing, the moment a home stops supporting life and starts controlling it. On paper, everything still looks fine. Marcos earns well, pays his bills on time, and lives in a city that rewards ambition and status. But day to day, his behavior quietly changes. He checks his bank app for small decisions, delays replacing things that are breaking, and mentally calculates costs before saying yes to anything. His apartment looks good from the outside, but inside, choices are shrinking. Subscriptions stack up, fixed expenses dominate, and flexibility slowly disappears. The problem isn't luxury spending, it's commitment spending. Rent, taxes, insurance, transportation, and services that lock his income in place before it ever reaches him. Every month starts already partially spent. Before Marcos makes a single choice, most of his paycheck is gone on obligations he cannot change. This creates a quiet pattern. He avoids risk, delays change, and optimizes for stability instead of progress. Career moves feel dangerous, switching jobs feels risky, relocating feels impossible, not because he lacks income, but because his margin is gone. From the outside, it still looks like success. Inside, it feels like standing still on a moving treadmill. This is how high-income environments trap people, not with failure, but with comfort that slowly removes options. Marcos isn't poor, he's constrained.
And that constraint compounds quietly, month after month, without making noise.
When people look at Marcos's situation, they focus on the wrong number. They see the income and assume the problem must be spending, discipline, or priorities. But income alone doesn't explain outcomes. What matters is how much of that income remains flexible after the system takes its share. In a high-cost city, the salary looks big, but the structure around it is heavy. Housing demands more, taxes scale up, services cost extra, and convenience becomes expensive by default. Marcos isn't choosing to spend more, the environment is choosing for him. A higher salary pushes him into higher brackets, not just for taxes, but for rent expectations, neighborhood norms, and baseline lifestyle costs that quietly become mandatory. What used to be optional becomes expected. Living closer to work, paying for faster transportation, buying time with services instead of saving money with effort. None of these choices feel irresponsible. Each one feels reasonable in isolation. But together, they form a system where earning more doesn't create freedom, it just raises the cost of participation. This is why two people with the same income can experience completely different financial lives. The city acts like an invisible multiplier, either helping savings grow or draining them silently. Marcos doesn't feel broke, he feels stuck. And that feeling doesn't come from bad decisions, it comes from a structure designed to absorb income before it can turn into leverage. Until you see this clearly, it's easy to blame yourself for a problem that was never personal to begin with. At this point, something important happens. Marcos starts to feel pressure without being able to name its source. Nothing dramatic goes wrong, no crisis, no sudden expense, no reckless decision, just a constant sense that money is always slightly behind him. Every month begins with optimism. This time he'll save more. This time the numbers will finally move in the right direction. And every month ends the same way. The account resets, the surplus disappears, and the cycle quietly restarts. What makes this trap effective is that it feels normal. Everyone around him lives the same way, talks about the same pressures, and treats this financial tension as the cost of ambition. High rent is justified by opportunity. High taxes are framed as the price of living where things happen. High expenses are softened by the idea that this is temporary. But temporary stretches into years. Marcos doesn't feel poor, he feels obligated. Obligated to stay near work, obligated to maintain a certain lifestyle, obligated to keep earning at this level just to avoid falling backward. The city doesn't need to trap him with force, it traps him with momentum. Leaving feels risky, staying feels exhausting, and the longer he remains, the more expensive change becomes. This is how high-income cities quietly remove choice, not by blocking exits, but by making every alternative feel irresponsible. And once choice disappears, freedom follows shortly after. What Marcos doesn't notice at first is how stability slowly turns into constraint, not because he's failing, but because the system rewards staying still. His income is strong enough to survive, but not strong enough to escape. Every dollar has an assignment before it even arrives. Rent claims the largest share, taxes take their cut automatically, daily expenses expand to match the environment, and whatever remains feels too small to create momentum. This isn't lifestyle inflation in the obvious sense. Marcos isn't buying luxury, he's buying normalcy at premium prices. A decent apartment, reliable transportation, acceptable food, basic comfort. None of it feels excessive, yet together they consume nearly everything. The city quietly recalibrates what reasonable means. Prices rise, expectations follow, and suddenly cutting back feels like falling behind. Saving becomes an act of discipline rather than progress. Investing feels distant. Long-term plans stay theoretical. What makes this dangerous is that nothing feels broken. Marcos pays his bills on time, avoids debt, and appears responsible by every traditional metric. But stability without surplus creates fragility. One unexpected shift doesn't cause collapse, it exposes how thin the margin always was. The system doesn't punish recklessness, it punishes stagnation disguised as success. And the longer Marcos stays inside it, the harder it becomes to tell whether he's building a future or just maintaining the present. At some point, Marcos realizes that the most dangerous word in the entire system isn't expensive, it's approved. The bank doesn't ask whether his life will feel lighter, it only checks whether the numbers technically fit inside a formula. Approval is not designed to protect him, it's designed to minimize risk for the institution while maximizing long-term commitment. On paper, the deal works. In real life, it compresses his future into fixed monthly obligations that don't care about burnout, layoffs, or changing priorities. What looks like progress is often just permission to lock himself into decades of required performance. The system teaches Marcos to celebrate access instead of sustainability. Being allowed in feels like winning, even when the terms quietly remove flexibility. Once approved, every decision becomes defensive. Changing jobs feels risky, taking time off feels irresponsible, saying no feels expensive. This is how good earners become compliant, not through force, but through comfort tied to obligation. Nothing explicitly says you're trapped. Instead, everything subtly says don't move. And because Marcos can technically afford it, questioning the structure feels unnecessary, almost ungrateful. But affordability is not freedom, it's just survivability under ideal conditions. The real cost of approval isn't the interest rate or the monthly payment, it's the loss of optionality. And once optionality disappears, even high income starts to feel small. At this point, Marcos understands something most people never stop to question. The system didn't fail him, and he didn't fail either. He simply followed rules that were never designed to create freedom, only stability under constant obligation. High-income cities, easy approvals, and impressive salaries don't create wealth by default. They create commitment, dependency, and silence. Once you see this structure, you can't unsee it. Every paycheck, every approval, every "you can afford this" starts to sound different. This channel exists for one reason: to slow the game down long enough for you to actually see it. Not to tell you what to buy, where to live, or how to invest, but to expose the invisible rules shaping your financial decisions before you lock them in for decades. If this video clarified something you felt but couldn't name, that pressure, that contradiction, that sense of earning well yet feeling stuck, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. Not motivation, not hype, but structure, numbers, and clarity about how money systems really work. These videos are not meant to scare you, they're meant to give you back choice. Because the most expensive mistake isn't buying the wrong house, it's building a life you can't step away from. And once you understand that, you stop chasing approval and start designing freedom.